Somewhere inside each of us is a calling. It's what gets us out of bed in the mornings. It's not just a routine, but something greater. It's the spirit that makes us move with alacrity. The difference between a job and a career. The difference between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Between just living in the world and making a difference. Fulfilling a dream and impacting the nation. We care. We are here to serve. We inspire. We innovate. We are leaders. What we have can't be bought or borrowed. Our integrity matters. We protect Jamaica's borders, facilitate trade, and optimize revenue collection. We are the Jamaica Customs Agency, placing country above self.
In 2013, for the Jamaica Customs Agency, was a year of transformation and facing new challenges. Let's take a moment to recap the last 10 years.
It was a year like no other. On March 28, 2013, the Jamaica Customs Department was designated the status of an executive agency with an effective date of April 2, 2013. The agency undertook a journey towards the modernization of the entire organization. Embarking on the journey, a technical, operational, and human resource transformation was deemed necessary, and having the right tools in place was essential. This transformation has paved the way towards an increased and improved online presence, paperless solutions, and a revamped legislative framework. We live by the premise, keeping our customers in focus. Our employees are provided with ongoing trainings and are continuously upskilled and reskilled. Our human resource management and development programs are crafted to intentionally empower and develop the capacity of the staff to maintain a cadre of employees that can respond to the demand of a world-class customs agency. Achieving excellent customer satisfaction is a primary focus of the agency as we continue to build a culture of trust and understanding through our international quality assurance standards, demonstrating that customs cares. Today, nearly every aspect of our operation is being digitized and automated, underpinned by a robust state-of-the-art technological landscape. Our advancements on this front also saw the JCA being a core site in the GovNet project, interconnecting various government digital infrastructures. As a part of the evolution, we acquired and implemented the Automated System for Customs Data, ASICUDA. Modern capabilities allowed for integration, risk management, compliance, and transparency, resulting in efficient, effective, and significantly reduced clearance time and cost. Stemming from the success of the ASICUDA project, the Jamaica Single Window for Trade, JSwift, was born. JSwift serves as an electronic platform which allows traders involved in cross-border trade to submit transactional information through a single web-based access point. This electronic platform is a collaboration administered by various cross-border regulatory agencies and participating government agencies. Our transition to a modern world-class customs administration necessitated the provisioning of online services to be made available, enabling 24-hour operations. The technological revolution within the agency over this past decade has also impacted how we safeguard our borders. The revolution resulted in the advancement of the Border Protection Division, which continues to build our risk management, intelligence, and investigative capacities while employing new technologies to better detect, deter, and interdict persons involved in transnational criminality. With over 1,300 employees, the Jamaica Customs Agency is growing to be one of the largest law enforcement agencies, with its main goal of keeping us safe while facilitating trade and generating revenue for national development. We know that this could not be done in isolation, but rather required the cooperation of all border regulatory agencies. We continue to connect and collaborate with innovators across various industries while building strategic partnerships.
Looking to the future, in the face of new challenges and possible threats, we embrace cutting-edge technological solutions and innovative approaches to sustain the evolution of the agency, continuing from a modern, world-class customs administration into a world-leading customs. We continue to prove our resilience by always placing country above self.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the Jamaica Customs Agency Anti-Corruption Panel Discussion and Luncheon 2024. My name is Kingsley Henry, and I'm your moderator for this morning. My day job is Senior Director, Non-Intrusive Inspection and Security Management at Jamaica Customs. And this is one of those things that I do often, and I encourage the Commissioner to add a little extra on the pay for these type of duties, but I remember the last time she told me the reward is thank you. All right? So this morning, we are here because this is the 4th annual panel discussion being hosted by the Jamaica Customs Agency. And we have some very special guests in-house with us this morning, and I must acknowledge them. First and foremost, our CEO, Velma Ricketts-Walker. Welcome, good to see you, Commissioner. We are also privileged this morning to have the chair of the Jamaica Customs Advisory Board, Mrs. Gina Phillips-Black. This morning, our keynote speaker or presenter, Mr. Milton Samuda. We also have a very distinguished panel of presenters this morning, and I will acknowledge them generally because my co-moderator and I will introduce them more specifically as we get to the panel discussion. So to our panelists, a special welcome to you this morning. We'd also like to acknowledge there are CEOs, there are vice presidents, there are managers, and there are representatives for over 30 private sector and public sector partners here this morning, and we're happy that all of you accepted the invitation to participate in this year's panel discussion and luncheon. So a special welcome and a special thank you. We also have the Jamaica Customs Agency, some of our senior management team here. We have our Deputy Commissioner in charge of Border Protection, Marlon Lowe, my immediate supervisor. And we have senior directors and we have directors and managers here this morning. And I want to say a special welcome. And I don't want to leave out those who are joining us via the World Wide Web. We are happy that you have taken the time this morning to tune in via the JIS feed to be part of this morning's event. Ladies and gentlemen, this annual panel discussion is one of our many stakeholder forums. And this year's theme is Ethical Leadership, the Impact on Cross-Border Trade, Supply Chain, and Trade Facilitation. And because of how broad that theme is, we thought it important to bring together all the stakeholders who are here in this room this morning. And so this morning, our presentation and our discussion will focus on some key areas. These areas include ethical leadership and combating corruption, encouraging transparent and accountable practices, and challenges and barriers to ethical leadership. And so we trust at the end of this discussion today, we'll achieve the objective, which is to create the sense that combating corruption is a corporate responsibility for all of us who are partners in the cross-border movement of trade in Jamaica and globally. But like we do at Jamaica Customs and we do generally in Jamaica, we don't get too deep into our functions without paying due respect to the national anthem, and that will be done this morning, and that will be followed by our opening prayer, which will be done by Mr. Cassell Dunkley, who is the Director of Investigations at the Jamaica Customs Agency. So at this time, I'll ask us all to stand. And I was looking around for the flag, but we can face forward as the national anthem will be played.
Eternal Father, benevolent, guide us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil powers. Be all light to countless souls. To all leaders, great defender, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth, be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Teach us true respect for all. Stand response to duty's call. Strengthen us the weak to cherish. Give us vision lest we perish. Knowledge
Thank you. Please remain standing as Mr. Dunkley come to the lectern to lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And as you said, the Commissioner will say thank you. But as in service for the Lord, I am waiting to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Our God, our help in ages past. Lord, you are our aid for years to come. You give us shelter in life's stormy blast and challenges. And so this morning, we give you thanks for ushering us into a new day, a day that we have never seen before, a day, Lord, where we can do our task that you have assigned us to do. And so this morning, as we come together, Lord, to have discussion and leadership and ethics, Lord, you are the great leader who have laid down our moral guide that how we should operate in this life. But Lord, because we recognize, Lord, that evil does exist, and Lord, fallen man are not the person that you want them to be, we come together this morning to have discussion how we can use the good that we have to make Jamaica a better place. The good that we have, how we can use it, Lord, to override the negativity that exists among us. And so, Lord, we pray that you will guide the moderator and those that will be deliberating this morning. We thank you, Lord, for leadership that you have given unto us. And we bless you, Lord God, for Jamaica land we love. Despite the challenges, Lord, that we encounter, we have so much to give you thanks for. There is so much to thank you for than that which to complain about. And so, Lord, we ask that your Holy Spirit will guide this day proceeding. And those that are on their way, we pray, God, that you will guide them. Let everything be done to your honor and to your glory, that Jamaica will be a better place, that we can, God, achieve that which we set out to achieve in Vision 2030. Bless us even now, we pray, and let your Holy Spirit direct our faculties, that when we shall leave here, Lord, with something worthwhile that we can go about, Lord, and to do our task, and to recognize that evil shall not prevail over good, but good will prevail over evil. Bless this morning. Have thine own way, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Reverend Bishop Dunkley. And I don't know about you, but that prayer kind of lifted my spirit. Me kind of feel a lot better after that. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we will continue this morning's proceedings by inviting our CEO and Commissioner, Mrs. Velma Ricketts Walker, to bring opening remarks. Please put your hands together for our Commissioner.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I want to thank Mr. Dunkley for that prayer. He actually is a man of the cloth. So I'm not sure if any of you realize that it comes with that type of talk, right? And he has that. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my esteemed pleasure to open the Jamaica Customs Agency's anti-corruption panel discussion. And I also extend a very warm welcome to our moderator extraordinaire, our guest speaker, our panelists, special invited guests, all participants present in person and online, members of the Jamaica Customs Agency, welcome, welcome everyone. As was stated by the moderator, this is the JCA's fourth staging of our anti-corruption panel discussion. And I stand proud and humbled to lead and serve as CEO and commissioner of this noble organization, the Jamaica Customs Agency. I can get a clap for that still. The discourse of this year's anti-corruption panel discussion is centered on the theme, ethical leadership, the impact on cross-border trade, supply chain, and trade facilitation. It is therefore no coincidence that the respective panelists were invited to participate, as each of you bring your own experiences, expertise, and perspectives to bear on this forum, where we will delve into the critical role of ethical leadership in shaping customs and the overall trade environment. At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we recognize the crucial role that ethical leadership plays in preventing and combating corruption and fostering a culture of accountability. It is through strong ethical leadership that we can effectively promote transparency and integrity. And it is through collaborative efforts, such as this panel discussion, that we can create awareness and drive meaningful and sustainable change within our various entities. The JCA has come a far way. And what do I mean by this? In recent years, we have been more proactive in not just participating, but importantly, leading the discourse on corruption. Underpinned by the WCO, or the World Customs Organization's revised Arusha Declaration, the leading guiding principles for integrity development within customs administrations, the Jamaica Customs Agency has instituted several mechanisms and implemented several strategic initiatives which have further heralded the agency's modernization and transformation agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to remind you of some of the key areas in which we should operate within the scope of a robust, efficient integrity program. Elements such as leadership and commitment, regulatory framework, transparency, automation, reform and modernization, audit and investigation, code of conduct, human resource management, morale and organizational culture, and of course, relationship with our stakeholders. The Jamaica Customs Agency is serious about preventing and combating corruption through the implementation of practical solutions. Time will not allow me to delve into all the elements of the revised Arusha Declaration. However, I will mention a few to include improvements in our regulatory framework, seen with the introduction of the new Customs Act currently before Parliament, the reform of our human resource management machinery, evidenced by an even more transparent recruitment process, the digitalization or automation of several trade and customs-related procedures and processes driven by our core customs management system, ASICUDA, as well as ongoing implementation of the Jamaica Single Window for Trade, JISTV, the online electronic single window, which positively impacts the trade and other border regulatory agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, integrity is a crucial part of our operations at Customs and is also one of our core values. The agency has strategically sought to institutionalize how we operate through the establishment of the Internal Affairs Division, and further builds out on this division with the introduction of an anti-corruption and integrity section. As part of being more transparent as an agency, in recent years, we have undertaken far more stakeholder engagement, such as this panel discussion, to include consultations, sensitization, outreach, and other initiatives. Additionally, in keeping with the thrust to maintain integrity of the supply chain and the continued reform of other areas such as our non-intrusive inspection and physical inspection programs, this remains vital and critical for us. And also as it relates to the expansion of our authorized economic operator program. And for these, ladies and gentlemen, we crave your support to these programs. I am sure you already know, but if not, it gives me great pleasure to inform you of one of our key achievements that demonstrates our commitment to our core values and the delivery of quality service. Team Customs, of course, you know that. That is, in 2023, the Jamaica Customs Agency received ISO 9001:2015 certification in quality management system. This is not a process in the agency, it is not a unit in the agency, it is in the entire Jamaica Customs Agency across 54 business units within the agency. Now, this is a testament of our work, and it also holds us accountable as an agency to ensure that we continue to perform at the high standards that we commit and uphold for our staff, customers, and our other stakeholders. Leadership, as well as the commitment to drive the various policies and strategic initiatives, is critical. It is therefore important that as CEO and Commissioner, I continue to offer the requisite support required to facilitate their effective development and implementation. Additionally, through our partnerships with the World Customs Organization under the Anti-Corruption and Integrity Promotion Program, ACIP, we are enhancing our efforts to ensure a robust and transparent customs environment. Under ACIP, the Customs Integrity Perception Survey, CIPS, was a critical component which was initiated as a part of the commitment aiming to capture the perceptions of private sector stakeholders about customs practices. So we're putting ourselves out there to find out more so that we can improve. The most recent survey, administered in 2023, was a pivotal step in our ongoing journey to enhance our operations. Its primary goal was to measure our stakeholders' perceptions and identify areas needing attention. By understanding these perceptions, we aim to refine our strategies and strengthen our commitment to transparency and integrity. The findings from the SIPs, which is now available on our website, and I urge you to visit there so you can, see the information. And it highlights areas where we can improve, particularly in understanding and addressing matters pertaining to our regulatory framework. The introduction of the new Customs Act and the ratification of the revised Kyoto Convention, which is the blueprint for modern and efficient customs procedures, are significant steps towards simplifying these regulations and enhancing our operational transparency. We are grateful to all the participants who participated in the survey. Your feedback was valuable and will be used as a part of our overall anti-corruption strategy to enhance and preserve the integrity of the Jamaica Customs Agency and, by extension, the social and economic foundation of our nation. Today's event is an opportunity to explore the impact of ethical leadership and practices on cross-border trade and border supply chain, and the broader supply chain. Our discussions will focus on how ethical leadership is in combating corruption and fostering a culture that actively resists unethical practices, common obstacles leaders face, and discuss practical strategies to overcome challenges which are essential for maintaining a strong ethical culture. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, states that, and I quote, building a system to promote integrity in customs administration requires not only the effort to put in place the necessary measures to combat corruption, but also ongoing vigilance to ensure that the measures continue to operate as intended, end quote. Therefore, you have the Jamaica Customs commitment. You have my commitment that we will continue to put forward our best efforts to prevent and combat corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, we also crave your continued support and commitment in the fight against corruption to bring about positive and sustained change. Fighting corruption must be regarded as a shared responsibility that calls for collective action from every government entity, private sector, our various industry partners, customers, and the wider stakeholder community. As we navigate the dynamic customs environment, international trade, and supply chain landscape, the insights and discussions shared today will be crucial in guiding and helping us to uphold the highest standards of transparency and accountability. Together, through continued dialogue, collective effort, and the implementation of the necessary policies, procedures, and initiatives, we can uphold the highest standards of integrity and foster a customs and trade environment that supports fair and transparent trade practices. In closing, and I'm finally there, I wish to reaffirm that combating and preventing corruption requires collaboration and support. I look forward to a robust panel discussion with the aim of reaching viable solutions which will manifest in positive results. Thank you for your participation and commitment as we work together towards further strengthening ethical leadership within our respective organization. And I'm sure we can do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And if you don't take away anything else from what the Commissioner said this morning, take away one thing: leadership matters, right? And under the leadership of our current Commissioner and CEO, the public, our stakeholders, will realize that we're not shying away from the dirty topic of corruption, right? It is something that we are facing head on, and that requires strong leadership and determined leadership to accomplish that success in that fight. So thank you again, Commissioner, for your opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my responsibility as moderator this morning to introduce our keynote presenter. Is Mr. Milton Samuda. Mr. Samuda is the managing partner of Samuda and Johnson Attorneys at Law and heads the firm's commercial department. He's a member of the Jamaica Bar Association. Mr. Samuda's practice includes tourism, corporate and hotel financing, trade and transportation, mining and energy, sports and entertainment, and maritime law. Mr. Samuda is a distinguished past president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, past chairman of the Jamaica Promotions Corporation, JAMPRO, the Investment and Development Promotion Agency of the Government of Jamaica, and a founding member and a past deputy chairman of the Jamaica Civil Society Coalition. Mr. Samuda is the chairman of the Institute of Law and Economics, chairman of the National Dance Theatre Company, NDTC, chairman of Berger Paints Jamaica Limited Pensions Fund, a director of Berger Paints Jamaica Limited, a public listed company, and a director of VM Building Society, VM Wealth Management Limited, and its parent, VM Investment Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome our keynote presenter this morning, Mr. Milton Samuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And let me first of all recognize the Commissioner, Mrs. Velma Ricketts-Walker, other executives of the JCA, my fellow panelists, all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen and presidents in the room, and of course members of the media. Now, before I go into the substance of my remarks, I need to quickly do three things. Apart from thanking the Commissioner for her very kind invitation, I want to acknowledge the strategic method in which she had it delivered through my friend and fellow Woolmerian Kirk Benjamin, thus ensuring that I wouldn't say no. So you see, the Commissioner is very strategic. The other thing that I want to do is to congratulate the Commissioner on her recent national award. Please join me in doing so. You know, we often say when these things happen, well-deserved, but it is well-deserved because it has been well-earned. And the third thing, which I confess is completely self-indulgent, is to just take a few seconds to say how pleased I am to be formally associated now with the Customs Agency, bearing in mind that my late mother, Leonie Samuda, was the personal officer there during her civil service career. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know how lawyers are, and there are too many of us in the house already. We like to follow instructions, and we like context. So the instructions I have are very specific from the Commissioner. The topic is broad, And no doubt being fearful of what lawyers might do with a broad topic, she narrowed it. And I was given, first, ethical leadership and combating corruption. Secondly, encouraging transparent and accountable practices. And third, looking at the challenges and barriers to ethical leadership. But in terms of context, your commissioner's letter, dated August 14, 2024, very deliberately said that it is against the background of the JCA having developed and implemented its anti-corruption and integrity program in an effort to preserve the core values of our organization. Very important context. The discussion in the panel, what we are trying to achieve here today, is not in vacuum. And so I went to the website to get further context. And I noticed, first of all, the motto, country above self. Very important. Then looked at your vision statement, your mission statement. I noted your many stakeholders. I noted that you received managerial autonomy in March of 2013, becoming an executive agency. And that you identified your core values using the acronym, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, CAPIT. Customer focus, accountability, professionalism, integrity, and transparency. Finally, I reviewed your stated role. Your website, which is your public-facing mechanism, distill your role in 3 mandates: the equitable collection of revenue, the protection of Jamaica's borders against illicit imports, and the facilitation of trade. So when you look at your history, your mission, your vision, core values, role, mandates, I think it is obvious that the JCA is duty-bound to be ethical. So then, what of ethical leadership and its impact on cross-border trade, the supply trade, trade facilitation, in the context of this anti-corruption and integrity program? Again, lawyers love definitions, so a few definitions will assist us. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word ethical is an adjective relating to moral principles. It concerns that which is morally good or correct. So this is not something that is subjective or intended to be subjective. It's intended to be objective. The same source defines corruption as dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. And our own Corruption Prevention Act sets out in Section 14 an extensive definition of act of corruption. However, I must confess that the definition that I like is a simple definition used by Transparency International. And that is, and I quote, the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It encapsulates all of the many definitions that you see about corruption all over the world. I repeat, the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. We should note here that Jamaica is a signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We signed in 2005 and we ratified sometime later. In publishing the convention, the UN put out a program, I think it was, if I'm not correct, sponsored by one of the big 5 accounting firms. And the foreword to its publication states as follows, and I quote, "Corruption is an insidious plague that has a wide range of corrosive effects on society. It undermines democracy and the rule of law, leads to violations of human rights, distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. So sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, we think of corruption as simply the passing of money from one person to another, not realizing that what it is and has become, especially in this modern world, is a network of functionaries. So with those definitions and that context in mind, how does ethical leadership combat corruption? Now, in addressing ethical leadership and combating corruption, I wanted to have a framework, a definition, if you will. And looking at something written by Linda Trevino in 2003, she defined ethical leadership as demonstrating and promoting positive moral values based on conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relations. The authors explain that ethical leadership sets the tone for the entire organization, emphasizing the importance of integrity, honesty, and accountability. They concluded that when leaders promote and embody those principles, it creates a culture where corrupt practices are not tolerated. That view is echoed by the Harvard Division of Continuing Education and the Harvard Business School. The literature on personnel and the organization being led. So when you see, for example, this morning's passion and committee reflected in the commissioner, that is part of the start of it. If it isn't a personally held view and position, you can't translate that to your organization and to your members. If the leadership is seen either as soft on corruption or worse, complicit, how do you expect the organization to act ethically? Coming from a Christian perspective and speaking directly to educators, Mary Sullivan, in addressing ethical leadership, put it this way. Proverbs 11:1 states, "Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." And verse 3 continues, "The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them." So, ethical leadership must start at the top, and it must be visible. It must be palpable. Those who are led must see it in action. You can't talk about it and not do it. They must experience it when it is applied to themselves within the organization. And ethical leadership entails exhibiting strong moral principles through words and actions, including the willingness to address wrongdoings, even when it may not be advantageous for the organization. I want to cite a quick example. There are few people in the room, very few come to think of it, who may not be old enough to remember 1982, and when Johnson & Johnson faced that crisis of the extra strength Tylenol being poisoned. Right? Thank God it was confined to Chicago. I don't remember the amount of deaths, but there were some deaths, starting with the death of a child. Now, the reaction of Johnson & Johnson wasn't to pull in and to close ranks. It quickly pulled off the shelves 31 million bottles worth over $100 million and stopped all production and advertising related to the product. The swiftness of the decision, although incredibly costly, put customers' well-being at the forefront and saved lives, and had the added benefit of leading to the creation of tamper-resistant packaging, which is widely used now in the pharmaceutical and other industries. Consider now that this was not something in terms of wrongdoing or negligence moving from inside Johnson & Johnson. They were reacting to a third party, criminal third party, who I don't think was ever identified, targeting Johnson & Johnson. But they didn't throw up their hands and say, not us. The ethics that they operated with then determined their reaction. Locally, again, how many of you are old enough to remember the reputation that used to be had by the RGD? Once known as one of the most corrupt departments in Jamaica, with touts hanging outside the office and taking people in to offices and bypassing the system in full view of law enforcement. Dr. Patricia Holness entered the picture and seized with her own sense of ethical leadership, turned around that department. Closer to home, Commissioner hinted at it because she's a good marketer. But JCA had not dissimilar problems. And that, by a leadership, has been turned around into what I would now call a respectful fear for the JCA. On the global stage, when you have some time, read about the reaction of the leadership of the Muse. Got a big contract, which would have meant millions of dollars for the company. But in the interaction between the two entities leading up, the head of the Muse saw how her staff was being treated by this huge company that they were trying to onboard. And in the end, she said no. Much to the dismay of a lot of her shareholders. But she prioritized ethics, the treatment of her staff, and the environment in which her staff operated. What about Wells Fargo? Instead of facing the fact that their employees were fictitiously or creating rather fictitious accounts in order to meet targets, they pulled in. So that when it was discovered, of course, the result was not only a damage to reputation, but tremendous fines. On the international level, look at the transformation years ago in Tanzania and the transformation in South Africa. Nyerere on one hand, Mandela on the other. And the strides that were made, maybe not all economically, in knitting together a society that tried to prioritize ethics. But I left those two for the last because they illustrate another point. And the point they illustrate is that you cannot sustain ethical leadership on the back of one leader. Because if that leader disappears from the scene, that ethical leadership may not be sustained. And therefore, one of the responsibilities of ethical leadership is to ensure that anti-corruption structures are put in place and that succession planning favors personnel of integrity so that long after the ethical leader departs, the structures and personnel left behind continue to militate against corruption. I want to move now to encouraging transparent and accountable practices. Difficult, but it can be done. And of course, the best form of encouragement is example. What operates in the home operates throughout society. Parents can't say to children, do what I say, but not what I do. They see the disconnect instantly. So leadership, by example, is a good place to start. The leader's influence extends to all stakeholders. And when I say that, I want to put it broadly. Don't feel that ethical leadership concerns only those who are members of staff or personnel in the organization being ethically led. Because if the organization acts ethically, then external stakeholders who have to deal with the organization are forced to deal with them on their terms. But example alone is insufficient. As the JSA has done, ethical leadership must not only speak and lead by example, but must also act by putting in anti-corruption guardrails, issuing integrity guidelines, developing codes of conduct and enforcing them, codes of conduct that apply internally and to external stakeholders as to how they engage the organization, supporting whistleblowers, rewarding outstanding integrity, and yes, levying sanctions where acts of corruption are discovered. And please, in doing this, members of JSA, remember your role. It's good to always remember your role. The JSA is vital to our country's sovereignty, economy, and national security. Your operations regulate the flow of goods and services across our borders and play a crucial role in ensuring national security by preventing the illegal cross-border movement of illicit goods, weapons, and illegal drugs. Additionally, the JSA generates revenue for the government by collecting tariffs and duties which can then be used to fund essential public services and infrastructure development. I move now to the third of my instructions, challenges and barriers to ethical leadership. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that one of the main challenges to ethical leadership and ethical practices is cultural. We have lived so long with and tolerated corruption that it is now a comfortable member of our national household. The rich uncle about whom everybody whispers, but about whom not much is said. And in order to make him comfortable and to ease our collective conscience, we have various euphemisms for describing him. He is not Uncle Corruption, he is a little hustling, or he is run-ins, or he's the cost of doing business. And we explain away his voracious appetite by saying, man of eat a food. And then in resignation we say, I saw the thing said. Additionally, we're hampered by outdated legislation with insignificant sanctions and with ancient provisions bearing no relevance to our current realities and to the advent of technology. So often, and we find it with the poor JCF, those whom they have to confront are better resourced. We're also faced with a very complex and intertwined interests which sustain corruption based on mutually beneficial relations. I've often said that if you see something inexplicably inefficient and or wrong, when you see something that looks silly, stupid, inexplicable, someone is benefiting. The resultant societal cynicism and corruption, which tolerates the skirting of rules and regulation, those become yet other hurdles which the ethical leader must then overcome, especially when it is viewed as out of step with the usual. Ethical leaders find themselves in that position all the time. You enter a room and you realize that your views are in fact the minority view. I remember years ago, I was president of the JCC at the time. I spoke somewhere about corruption. And I said, we in the private sector have to look at ourselves. Because if somebody is taking a bribe, somebody is paying it. It was a general statement. To me, it is a truthful statement. It is patent. But at a subsequent meeting, I was told by not one, but several of members of the private sector that my role was to beat up the government, not to beat them up. Right? So if we don't hold to the views which we publicly espouse, if our private action differs from our public statements, that cynicism to which I just referred will not only persist, it will grow and make it even more difficult for ethical leaders. I don't think there's anybody in this room who is in any doubt that the present predicament that we're facing in combating crime is intimately associated with our household member, our rich uncle. Now, let me briefly go back to the overarching theme, ethical leadership and its impact on cross-border trade, the supply chain, and trade facilitation. And I just want to make one all-encompassing comment. Globally, ethical leadership has not had the positive impact on cross-border trade, the supply chain, and trade facilitation one would have wished. In this increasingly connected and ever-shrinking globe, where the space between human beings is now a whisper, unethical practices among nations concerning the rules of trade, not just individuals and organizations, nations act unethically every day. Failure to ensure that workers are treated fairly along the supply chain. Failure to ensure that human rights are respected at source and across the value chain. Failure to enforce environmental standards in production and supply equally. Failure to hold suppliers accountable for their actions. Failure to ethically supervise trade treaties and borders. All of that feeds into national and international corruption. Do not make the mistake of viewing these things in silos. They're all connected and getting even more so connected because those who act unethically command the same technology and sometimes more that is available to law enforcement. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, and I know there have been some criticisms about the index, gives Jamaica a score of 44 out of 100 and ranks us at 69 out of 180 countries. A failing grade by any measure. We do well, therefore, to heed the words of the chairman of Transparency International, Francois Valerian, and I quote, "Corruption will continue to thrive until justice systems can punish wrongdoing and keep governments in check. When justice is bought or politically interfered with, it is the people who suffer. Leaders should fully invest in and guarantee the independence of institutions that uphold the law and tackle corruption. It is time to end impunity for corruption." End of quote. And I found that a very strong statement. My one criticism is that it is not just governments that we must confront on this. Organizations in this private sphere and in that gray area between government and private must adhere to the same standards which we require of our governments. Ladies and gentlemen, ethical leadership must lead by example. Ethical leadership must be brave. Ethical leadership must be resolute. Ethical leadership must form like-minded alliances. Don't try and fight it on your own. Ethical leadership must make sure that itself and its functionaries are trained and resourced. Ethical leadership must create lasting institutional structures and advance personnel of integrity. Ethical leadership must advocate. Ethical leadership must not quit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Samuda. I should have asked you to stay, just in case members of our audience have any questions. So if you have any questions, there's a microphone to my far left, just in front of the JCA ISO 9001 banner. You may go right there and pose your questions if you have any to Mr. Samuda. And then after that, we will introduce our panel and go into the panel discussion. And of course, he will be a member of the panel, so if you wish to reserve your questions for that time, that would be okay too, but he's available to answer your question if you have any questions after that. Very in-depth, and might I say, it should have stirred something in all of us type of presentation. So if you have any questions, you may go to the microphone. All right, thank you, Mr. Samuda. So, ladies and gentlemen, I alluded a little bit in my welcome to the fact that I have a co-moderator of international acclaim for the panel discussion, and my co-moderator will be making her Jamaican debut. I think maybe she intends to put me into retirement. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome to the lectern with me, my co-moderator for the panel discussion, Mrs. Velma Ricketts-Walker.
Yes. Thank you. Wow. Mr. Samuda, thank you so much. I tried taking a pic of your last slide, but it came down too quick. So those words were very impacting, and I am sure the team at Customs will definitely, use those words and as nuggets for us to build out, continue to build out our integrity program. So thank you so much for that presentation. Really evoke a lot of things in me, certainly. Yes, thank you.
All right, so we will introduce and invite our panelists to join us on the platform. And we will start with our guest presenter, Mr. Milton Samuda. And we will be seated starting at chair number 3 and going further to our left. Our next panelist is Ms. Kelly Greenaway, Senior Vice President of Legal, Regulatory and Corporate Affairs of the Port Authority of Jamaica. Ms. Kelly Greenaway is an attorney at law with 15 years of diverse experience in commercial law, civil litigation, corporate governance, insurance management, and performance leadership. Her prior assignments included leading the legal and insurance department at the Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited. Put your hands together and welcome Ms. Kelly Greenaway.
Our next panelist is Lieutenant Colonel, retired Richard A. DaCosta, Justice of the Peace, and he is the Senior Director, Intelligence at our major organized crime and anti-corruption agency. Lieutenant Colonel DaCosta spent 20 years in the Jamaica Defense Force in several capacities during his tenure. He was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel in 2017 and was also appointed commanding officer of the now Military Intelligence Unit. Lieutenant Colonel DaCosta was awarded the Medal of Honor for Meritorious Service in August 2013, the first bar to the Medal of Honor for Meritorious Service in 2019, the Medal of Honor for General Service, Local Operations for 2018, the Medal of Honor for Long Service and Good Conduct, and the Military Commendation Medal in 2020. He currently is, as was said, the Senior Director of the Intelligence at MOCA.
Our next panelist is Mr. Metri Siaga, CD, President of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. Mr. Siaga is and he heads the Jamaica Fiberglass Product Limited, one of the Caribbean's largest contract manufacturing furniture companies. Mr. Siaga was elected President of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association in 2013, and he served as president for 4 years. His passion for national development and continued progress of Jamaica's productive sector has seen Mr. Siaga serve as chairman of the boards of various public bodies, including the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority, E-Learning Jamaica, and the Universal Service Fund. He also serves as deputy chairman of Petrojam. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Siaga.
Our next panelist, Mr. William Mafood, is the chairman of the Wesinka Group Limited. In August 2023, Mr. Mafood became the chairman of the board of directors for the Mona School of Business and Management. He specifically values his work in the areas of service to country and people, mostly through his term as president of the PSOJ, working closely with the Partnership for Progress and Electricity Sector Team, Enterprise Team, ESET, is serving on the board of the Food for the Poor, among other ventures. Welcome, Mr. Mafood.
Our next panelist is Mr. Sidney Thwaites, President of the JMEA. Mr. Thwaites' career has spanned 30-plus years in the financial services, petrochemical, and consulting industries. Mr. Thwaites also co-founded lubricating specialties company Jamaica in 2015. In 2015 and 2016, Mr. Thwaites served as an advisory committee member for the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Mr. Thwaites also served as an advisory board member for the Petroleum Quality Institute of America from 2013 to 2017. He currently serves on the boards of the Lubricating Specialties Company Jamaica Limited, Top One Oil Jamaica Limited, Fleetwood Jamaica Limited, and currently serves as we said earlier, president of the JMEA, Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Welcome, Mr. Thwaites.
Our next panelist is an attorney at law and was called to the Jamaican bar in December of 2015. But I believe he has an even more important job,
yes,
one with the Jamaica Customs Agency.
Correct.
And he is the Deputy Commissioner, Border Protection. I am referring to our Mr. Marlon Lowe. Mr. Lowe is the National Project Director for the Electronic Single Window for Trade, JISTV, Chairman of the Customs Broker License Advisory Board, and the Jamaica Customs Agency Quality Assurance Committee, as well as chairman of the Airport Communication Project, AirCup. He holds the LLM in maritime law, among other accolades. Welcome, Mr. Marlon Reed.
And to round out our distinguished panel, we have Ms. Chandelaine Davis, Senior Director, Internal and Industry Liaison at the Jamaica Customs Agency. Ms. Davis has over 24 years of experience in Jamaica Customs, operations, market access and trade facilitation, trade policy development, and international trade negotiations. Ms. Davis is liaison to the ministries, departments, and agencies of the government, the World Customs Organization and its global membership, the World Trade Organization and other intergovernmental bodies, the CARICOM Secretariat and related institutions, and of course, to the private sector of Jamaica. Welcome, Ms. Davis. So ladies and gentlemen, with a panel as distinguished as this, I hope you're prepared to be here until 6 p.m. today. We don't intend to keep it that long, but we intend to have a very robust discussion, and everybody's looking astute and ready to participate in the discussion. Commissioner, we have some interesting questions to pose to our panelists to kind of delve a little more into the theme for this year's panel discussion. And we're not going to waste any time with, you already know why we're here, and we want to hear what our panelists' views are on some very important matters. And I am tempted to go to my boss first this morning, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to pose the first question to Mr. Siago of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And Mr. Siago, my question is, in what ways can ethical leadership serve as a catalyst for addressing and mitigating corruption?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I think that Milton said it best in his speech when he said that we have to recognize first ourselves that we have a problem. And the problem doesn't exist for customs or for any government. It exists within ourselves. And until we recognize that there are persons amongst us in the private sector who are creating or helping to create the problem. So I think it's one of awareness. I think it's one of leadership. I think that leadership from the political sector, from the private sector, from government agencies, all need to come together and say to ourselves, enough is enough. We have had enough crime, corruption, and badmanism. The time has come for us to come together and ask for and demand a gentler, softer, kinder Jamaica that we can all live in and be a part of.
Thank you, Mr. Siago. And ladies and gentlemen, and to our panelists, generally say, we'll pose questions to specific panelists, but if our other panelists want to jump into the discussion, feel free to do so. All right, Commissioner, you have any questions for our panelists?
Sure. You mentioned Mr. Lowe earlier, your boss, yes? And so I'm going to go to him. Mr. Lowe, how can ethical leadership be leveraged to effectively address and mitigate corruption in cross-border trade and supply chain operations?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. First of all, I see ethical leadership from a different perspective, and the Johnson & Johnson perspective calls upon that, which is harnessing the greatest value for our customer, for society, basically. And if we look at that, then what it means is that we'll always be doing the right thing within a value system. And for customs, the value system is CAPIT, and for other entities, they have their value system. And once we are always not thinking about ourselves, but thinking about the society, the community, customer, then ethical leadership is the barometer for us to, not to be self-interested, but to always realizing where you start, Mr. Samuda, our mission, our vision, and therefore ensuring that we're doing the right thing. So, Commissioner, it set the context for us to do the right thing to maximize value for society, for customers, and for our clients.
Great response, Mr. Lowe. But we want to take it a little bit further in terms of considering, and Mr. Mahfood, I'm going to throw this one to you, in terms of looking at, from your experience and your knowledge, are there examples where we see strong ethical principles having a direct influence on transparency and integrity in international trade? Because you're involved in international trade. From your experience and from your knowledge, are there any examples that you can share where that has mattered?
So I'm going to give you a number of examples, but I also want to speak to the points previously discussed. And I think one of the things that is most important for us to recognize, companies, and I'm speaking specifically now for private sector, companies that practice strong ethical leadership typically are much more successful and much more from many different respects, and I want to speak to some of these areas. Improved reputation, number one. Company brand, and I'll be the first one to tell you that Wisynco as a company has an extremely strong brand, is recognized as a very strong ethical company in its practices. High productivity levels, tremendous employee engagement, and finally, customer loyalty at a level that is unprecedented. Now, I want to speak specific to an incident. Many of you may remember 2016. Wisynco had a massive fire which burned our warehouse. We literally, within a matter of a few days, called on our suppliers around the world and said to them, we need assistance because of this crisis, and we were concerned about the future of the company and being able to get back up and operate. Within literally weeks, we had shipments, people were diverting shipments from all over the world. Suppliers had no concern whatsoever about our viability as a going concern. And so the ethical practices as a company, the integrity, the respect that we had internationally is one thing. But then on the ground, some of our competitors were going out and saying, well, Wisynco is going to be out of business in a few months, so we need to take away some of their shelf space. And the customers were saying, no, we reserve that space for Wisynco's products. And literally overnight, we were back up and running and were able to meet the needs of our customers. I remember our CEO stood up right the night of the fire in an interview, and he said, not one single employee is going to lose their job after this fire. And we ended up actually hiring more people. So I think those are the things that, and it starts, Milton, you spoke about it a lot in your presentation about starting at the top. And you have to live those values, practice those values. I actually printed out the Code of Ethics of Wisynco. Every single employee in Wisynco has to sign this Code of Ethics every single year. And there's ongoing training requirements that are required. Our directors have to sign it. Our executives have to sign it. And every single year, as people are, and every new employee coming in has to not only sign it, but be trained on the values of the company. And one of the things that Milton spoke about was faith. We also, in our Code of Ethics, it speaks to faith as being, we speak about faith as a part of our values, value of the organization, and secondly, our respect for country and family. So I think if you practice and live by those values, the benefits are tremendous.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahfood. What I'm hearing is that strong ethical leadership equals success. And you spoke to your brand, your reputation building, and just your customer loyalty and the value you create and deliver. That is awesome, and I really thank you for that contribution. So we're in a space where we collaborate a lot and we have partnership. And so my question to you, Miss Kelly Greenaway, is what role do cross-border collaborations and partnership play in strengthening ethical leadership and reducing corruption? And it seems like a loaded question as well, because I continue with this. And how can leaders ensure these alliances are rooted in integrity?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. So, as Milton pointed out, lawyers like definitions, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to begin by defining what I mean when I speak about ethics and ethical leadership. Essentially, especially in the public service, what that means is that you need to put the interests of the public at large first. You need to prefer them to your own interests. You need to prefer them to any particular interest group, special interest group, powerful person, the rich uncle. All of those persons you need to put above, below the public at large. And that's the first thing that you need to ask yourself when you start talking about collaborations and cross-border collaborations, because the reality of the situation is that who you invite into your house can make your house stronger or it can make your house weaker. So who are the persons that you want to collaborate with? What is the infrastructure and the governing principles that are moderating the way in which they are behaving, the way in which they are participating in cross-border trade? What are their supply chain checks and balances? Now, once you've done your initial vetting and you've decided that this is the kind of entity, whether it's a government, whether it's a foreign private sector entity, that you would be interested in getting into bed with, then you start looking at how can you support each other? What kind of intelligence are you able to share with each other? What kind of joint research can you do? And I want to harp on the importance, especially, of joint research, because we need to understand that the research that we do into corruption is exactly what is going to inform the development of the policies and, by extension, the laws that we're going to end up having to abide by. Now, as a developing country, we have less financial resources, less technological resources as some of the wealthier countries. And so as we're conducting this research and we're able to anticipate what are some of the threats that are coming down the road, what are the new ways that the corrupt actors are going to try to infiltrate our systems, we can also have a say in what are going to be the policy approaches towards combating those issues. And in so doing, we can actively plan for that, and we can indicate as well what are the resources or the support that we may need from the persons that we're collaborating with to be able to fulfill the joint effort that we're making at reducing corruption locally and globally and throughout the supply chain. Now, in terms of how we're going to ensure that those efforts are rooted in integrity, most important things, I think, are certainly transparency and accountability. So people can't do, blatantly corrupt things publicly. And so transparency is important. And where they do those things, the fact that they're going to be held accountable is incredibly important. So if we remember first, what I like to call the North Star, who is it that we are protecting? Who is it that we're serving? The public at large. And then we ensure that we're working with persons who hold the same values that we have and that we aspire to. And we ensure that we work in a way that is always transparent, and that when people fall short, they are held accountable, including the rich uncle. And I think that's how we go about it.
Thank you, Kelly. And I want to throw out a general question to the panel. We live in a society where corruption is accepted. How, as leaders, and what is the role of leadership in changing the ordinary Jamaicans' perception that this is just, and Mr. Samuda said it, that this is just the way things are, right? And this is how you get ahead. How do we change the perception that those who cut corners, get ahead quicker? How do we change that perception amongst Jamaicans? And that's a general question for any one of the panelists, or if all of you want to jump in on responding to that.
I'm actually prepared to answer. So forgive me for probably stealing Mr. Siaga's thunder. I saw him reaching for the microphone, so I just had to fire first. The critical thing is for persons to understand that there can be no concept of impunity at any level. And so we have to, as leaders within an organizational context, as leaders within society, whether we want to admit that people look to us for inspiration, guidance, and obviously for example, that we have to set the tone and we have to do things in a consistent and an appropriate way within the context of the approved norms, legislation, policy, regulation, at whatever level, to ensure that that message is consistently heard and understood, more importantly, by the public writ large. Law enforcement oftentimes struggles with the concept that we believe our country is as corrupt as any other place, if not greater. But I'm here to suggest that perhaps our perception of corruption vis-a-vis what it is that actually takes place could not be one and the same, because we clearly do have instances where information is brought forward by persons who have a sense within the context of what is allowed by law, whistleblower, for instance, protected disclosures, or out of a sense of patriotic duty or altruism, come forward with information to support the investigative and prosecution process. So we would not have successes where law enforcement action against corruption is concerned to be able to move our country forward. The challenge is, what is it that we believe about ourselves vis-a-vis what it is that we're told? What is it that the examples show vis-a-vis what it is that we have come to accept as a norm, and we push things aside simply because we believe that there's no change possible, there's no change happening, change will never occur. Small organizations like myself that I actually work for cannot afford to be inundated by that sense that we are never going to change anything, because at the end of the day, our mandate suggests otherwise, and we would fail right off the bat if we accepted things of that particular nature. And so in that regard, we continuously have to show and strive and to ensure that those instances when we do have success against things like grand or endemic corruption, that the public understands it and they understand how it came about, and that it could not have come about without the cooperation of like-minded people who think properly about situations that confront them on an individual or on a collective basis.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to jump in on that question?
I just wanted to say that I think that this simple answer to your question is leadership. And we have allowed a lot of the problems that we're having to become systemic. Our leadership has allowed the systems to be so bureaucratic that it creates the need for people to circumvent the system. That is the type of leadership we need, not only from a political level to change the legislations, but from within the agencies to remove the roadblocks that exist, that are there so that people have to go around the system to get what needs to get done. So whilst Milton had said that he was told that his role is to beat the government up, they can't escape today. They need some beating up because they have allowed those systems to remain in place.
Thank you, Mr. Siaga. What I'm getting for you, that one of the solutions to tackling corruption is ensuring that our processes are efficient. And I think we could have an entire panel discussion on that.
I want to add also another area, and that is, you mentioned whistleblowing. There needs to be also a very, very clear methodology for reporting, that people feel a sense of one, it's transparent, and two, that they're not going to be, victimized in that process. So every organization needs to have a proper whistleblower policy, which is adequate, to support the organization.
Yes. You going, Chandelier? Can you leave on your mic? Yes. Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to say, as Mr. Samuda said in his presentation, which basically set the foundation for this discussion, that, and I'm paraphrasing, that once we have established the ethical organization, it needs to be sustained. So every time the public, our stakeholders, our clients, interface with us, they encounter ethical behavior, and it forces them to comply in order to achieve their objectives. And this is in addition to all the other points raised. But it's very important for us to maintain what we're doing and to build upon what we're doing and to ensure that it's not just ethical leadership in a silo, but the aim of ethical leadership is to establish and to develop an ethical organization. So ethics permeates all levels within the organization, and our clients encounter that at every turn. I think it's a slow journey. It's a long journey, but it's a journey that can be accomplished if we are resilient in what we are doing.
Go ahead.
If I may, to the question I asked, one word, accountability. And accountability is two things, answerability and enforcement. There are attempts in society to get officials in various government entities to be answerable. That is done mainly through the talk show programs and so on nowadays. But you need enforceability to hold people to account, which is whatever penalties in a broad sense, whatever they are going to face when they are not answerable to people or cannot answer to people.
Thank you so much, panelists. I want to make sure that the Internal Affairs Division and the other members of the Jamaica Customs team is taking in these nuggets and making notes, because the idea behind this is to ensure that we grow from this. Mr. Siaga said something that I reflect on. When we're looking at practical solutions, it is as it says. And from a customs perspective, we never want to think that we're not an organization that understands and try to ensure that we are simplifying our processes, harmonizing our procedures so that it is easier to do business. Because the reality is, if there are hurdles, we have to understand that business, they're there to conduct their business, they're there to make their profits, to grow, to report to their shareholders. And we cannot be a bottleneck to that. Now, one of the trade facilitation and initiative that we have been doing is called the Customs Business Initiative and Interaction, where we go into the businesses. If we have not been to any of your businesses, let us know. We'll be there as soon as possible. But the idea is to learn from you and understand your business, because I am sure a number of businesses have this thing in their minds, and it may be very well true. These people don't understand business. That's government in general, maybe customs. Yeah? They don't understand business. And they're not understanding that they're holding us up our shipment. And in an effort to get what you need in a very quick turnaround time, persons will do what they ought not to do, right? So it is also very much important to us to ensure that we continue the trade facilitation mechanism, continue the simplifications, ensuring that the sensitization is there, that you understand how you need to interact with us, and we understand your business as best as possible so that we can serve you in the right and proper way.
So thank you, Commissioner. So Mr. Lowe kind of took us to segue to another area that we want to focus on in this discussion, and that is how we encourage transparent and accountable practices. And the question is, what are the key strategies ethical leaders can employ to foster transparency and accountability within an organization? And I'm going to throw that question to you, Mr. Siaga, and anybody else who want to jump in on that. And so what are some of those strategies that ethical leaders can employ within their organizations to foster transparency and accountability? And how can we effectively, in a practical sense, implement these type of strategies?
The size it is today. When we started it, the team members at the senior leadership level, which weren't a lot of people, were asking the questions, well, how are we going to know what the actual profits of the organization were? And I said, well, we're going to share that information with the staff. So from then, 30-something years ago, we started opening the books to the employees with a full transparency. And today, I mean, Wisynco last year made, $5.5 billion, so almost $800 million was distributed to our employees in profit share. And it's completely transparent because it's based on our audited accounts. Now we're a public company, so it's a lot easier for them to actually see the accounts of the organization. But it speaks to the point I made earlier that in about June of this year, we had a job fair in Portmore. There were 1,500 people who came to the job fair to apply for jobs at Wisynco. Our HR team did a survey of the people, and it wasn't that there were people who didn't have jobs. Almost every single one of those people already had jobs, but they wanted to come and work at Wisynco. So it speaks to retention, employee engagement, and how do you get people, because of transparency, people now see Wisynco as a company that they want to work for.
Excellent, Mr. Mafuda. If I wasn't sitting beside my boss, I would say. But Mr. Samuda, I don't know if you want to jump in on that, and then Mr. Thwaites, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how within your various sectors, how can companies and organizations implement strategies for transparency and accountability? The microphones will come, right? So once you hold them, right, they will take a few seconds. There's a delay.
That's why they switch back here. Yes, what I wanted to comment on, I will reserve because something that William just said. I remember there was a study I read years ago, which pinpointed that one of the benefits of acting in that manner is that internally, corrupt acts fell, particularly pilfering, because people felt a part of the organization, they felt properly rewarded. There was no quote-unquote need, right, to engage in some of the practices. So that's an additional benefit to what William said. But just going back to something Mr. Lowe said, I think it is important to always look at context, and you will forgive me for constantly referring to the family, because the best job, the most rewarding job that I've ever had is being a father. And therefore, I'm always using that example. And when kids are small, they push boundaries. And they look to see just how far they can go. And if you don't channel from very early and say what are the boundaries, what are the guardrails, what are the expectations, then you have a problem when they're older. So one of the mistakes I think that ethical leadership makes is that they wink at small infractions because there's so much else going on in the organization. And that small infraction becomes in the mind of the person an excuse for going even further. Always remember that grown-ups are just grown children. It hasn't changed. And the difficult period of adolescence is because it's exactly that, adults, less sense. Okay? So if you look at it as a continuum and you put in place the guidelines that are necessary, and you, as old-time people used to say, nip it in the bud, you find that there's not, well, as many problems unless the person is pathological. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that there are one of the ingredients of prejudice and even racism, but anything that has prejudice in it, is unfounded assumptions. There is an assumption by a number of people who make rules for the private sector that everybody corrupt, everybody going to try and go around the system, and therefore the approach is thou shalt not. I once said, I believe it was the Prime Minister Golding, that, you know, when I was asked a question, that I would save a lot of money from what I consider in certain areas over-regulation and put that money into enforcement. You make it easy for people to do things, not difficult. You seem to think that 90% of us are corrupt, and therefore the rules are designed to make you jump through 10 hoops so you catch the 90% who you think are corrupt. What you really should do is make it so easy for business to be done and resource your enforcement, detection and enforcement, so that when there's an infraction, you chop off the neck and people know you're serious. But you can't be humbugging private and other sectors by putting in place regulations designed to make it more difficult because you believe that this is an endemic problem. And then those who are supposed to monitor, enforce, are struggling for resources. Right? But you have, I remember once going to a certain organization which shall remain nameless. And I was told I needed to complete a form. So I completed the form, carried it to the next station, where I was given another form. I completed that form, carried it to another station. Then I went into a room where there were about 4 persons sitting at desks, all of whom sort of woke up when I came in. And I went to one, got it stamped and initialed. Went to another, stamped and initialed. You know, what you really need to do is to simplify the system, make it easy for law-abiding citizens to go about their business, and resource and reinforce the mechanisms to detect those who don't and to punish them.
Wonderful. Mr. Thwaites, do you have any further thoughts on this particular area?
Yes, I do, and Milton said it best, and there are just a couple of points that I want to reinforce. A lot of points have already been made, but I call that, Milton, we can't legislate to the lowest, the common denominator, because then we make a bureaucracy that's hard to get by and we make it difficult. So the leadership of the public sector has a responsibility to make things easier, employ the tools that we have, and to make it easy to do business. The private sector has the responsibility to understand our role, our requirements, and the legislation that we operate under. I have been in my office many times and hear a manager there cursing about a shipment we have that's being held by customs and how customs does this and that and the other. And when you remove the layers, we have an expired import permit on that item that customs can't clear it without. So it's training, understanding, accepting roles and responsibilities as well. And I don't know if it's the older I get, I have a very hard time looking at things in a vacuum. And one of the things in Milton's speech that he said is we all as leaders have to recognize the impact. It is not just the support indirectly and directly that corruption gives to organized crime, to the environment that we operate in Jamaica that we all complain about. I often hear we lament this happening over here, but we don't recognize the role that things that we do and how we go about our daily lives that they play in that issue. So I think it's stepping back as leaders and recognizing the impact of maybe these small things or the things that we take for granted, but the impact they have on the greater, the culture of how we operate in Jamaica. And just an example of impact indirectly. I was talking to a brand that is an international brand. And because of decisions they've made in their supply chain in other markets, it made it easier for their products to get imported into another market around the structures and appropriate duties and all these things. The impact on that brand is there's a section of the market, Latin America, where that product is viewed as a very low-end brand. It's a brand that's been built over more than 100 years globally, but there's a pocket in which it is viewed as the lowest quality brand in the market. It's not so, but that is the way it's viewed, and it's simply viewed that way because they have made decisions that have allowed it to get into other markets around the traditional structures, thereby available extremely cheap relative to other products, and it's impacted a global brand. So there are consequences. None of this happens in a vacuum.
You wish to have an intervention? Yeah. Kelly. Yes.
I wanted to look at something slightly differently because we were talking about what is it that we can do to combat the view that this is just the way things are in Jamaica. And so I wanted to point out the ISO certification that you have obtained. Now, a lot of the issue when we're dealing with corruption, the truth of the matter is in many instances we're dealing with some very, very dangerous people. And a lot of persons may know that something is happening within the organization. They may know something is awry in a particular government body or on the wharf or wherever it is. And they may be willing to say that unofficially to the powers that be within the organization. But understandably, that's a completely different question than asking them to come forward and sit down at a disciplinary panel and say, you know, this person is smuggling drugs or this person is taking bribes, because it can come down really and truly to a matter of life and death. So Jamaica, of course, and I fully support them, has very strong employment protection laws. I support them. But in a context where you have people who cannot be put before a disciplinary panel in a meaningful way, those laws become a serious impediment. And things like an ISO certification, what that tells me is that you have clearly documented processes. They're accountable, they're checks and balances. And then what it means is that I don't have to come forward and report that John is taking bribes. I don't have to say that this person is smuggling drugs. I just say they have to say they breached that procedure. And then you put them before the disciplinary panel based on that procedure. So by instilling those kinds of checks and balances and those kinds of documented processes, we also create a strategic opportunity for organizations to root out the bad apples without necessarily, and kind of avoid some of the risks that can be associated with that process. So I really want to commend that. I think that that's absolutely fantastic. I know that KFTL, our CEO, they achieved that as well earlier this year. So I'm hoping they're going to make the use of that. And congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to, the point that Kelly is making is very serious, and I know that we can take it one step further. there are mechanisms even within our legal framework, as challenged as it is now, which can be used. And everyone knows the story in relation to Al Capone. It has been written about, it's in movies, and so on. He was guilty of a raft of things people thought, including murder. But that's not what he was caught on. Tax. And this unexplained wealth which you see all around the place, starting with the parents who see an 18-year-old, unqualified, pulling up to deliver groceries to them in a car, the worth of which is more than they have made in their lifetime, and not saying anything is a problem. Seeing people parading around in a lifestyle when they apparently have no visible means or known means of income. And what the state needs to say in all of those cases is, I don't have the resources to investigate everybody, but you, and you, here is the tax assessment based on your lifestyle. I don't know the details of the legislation, but it is there. And it needs to be used. And you free up some of the resources to deal with the more intractable problems around. But that type of certification, that type of internal mechanism that allows you procedurally to go after those who are committing their infractions, very real and very good.
I see that the response commissioner has generated some discussion, and I see Mr. Siaga wants to jump in, and then Lieutenant Colonel, what was said a while ago, I mean, automatically, that must have pinched you for a response.
I would like, I think it would be remiss of me not to say that I think it's important that all of us in this room recognize that Customs is one of those agencies that is being proactive. The fact, as Kelly mentioned, that you have ISO certification. I don't know if the commissioner remembers, it's about 6 or 7 years ago. We had the opportunity to go on a trip to Singapore. And we sat beside each other in a meeting with their customs department. And the lady who was speaking to us said, our customers are so... And she kept referring to the people that brought goods in as our customers. And I saw a light bulb go off in the commissioner's head. And ever since that time, I have noticed the most customer-centric type of organization being developed under your leadership. And as a member of the private sector, I think it's very encouraging, and I want to congratulate you and your team for that.
Okay, I wanted to hearken to something that Mr. Samuda spoke to in relation to the impact of what it is that we all are up here speaking about corruption. And just as an intelligence professional, kind of my role is to articulate what the threat is and what the risk is to processes, procedures, and national security within the context of corruption. So I hate to sound like a negative person, but our small country and our place within the global supply chain, Jamaica has a significant transshipment ports, as a nod to people here from KFT and probably KW as well. The impact of the insider threat and the transnational smuggling of contraband items into and out of the country perhaps extends to reaches of this planet that we perhaps don't recognize. We have challenges with respect to containers that either emanate from our transship through Jamaica and end up in as far as a place as Australia, where over several years they've found significant quantities of illicit drugs that either were transshipped from here or transshipped through here to end up in Australia in commercial shipments of goods over the maritime routes of trade. Le Havre in France and other places. So critically, it's the small individual decision to engage in corruption that has a significant impact far beyond the 12-mile limit of Jamaica and the places where Jamaicans traditionally see as our markets, our supply sources, etc., etc. So what is it that we do within the context of transparency is cause people to understand what that threat and what that risk actually is. And we say it often enough and in the right fora to ensure that people understand that there is in fact a problem and that we cannot hide from it and we can't avoid it as a consequence. I can give another example in just closing that recently MOCA worked alongside its international partners and the U.S. Embassy to put on an aviation security conference at another hotel. And within that forum, we took the opportunity to highlight just what it is that we were seeing as a risk, not across the entirety of the transport sector, but just in relation to commercial aviation that emanates from or through Jamaica. And rising out of that conference, we were able to reach some, not all of the persons that were present or who didn't in fact take the opportunity to be present, and cause at least one significant airline that has routes through Jamaica to change their security processes with the expectation that it would be of significant cost to them. But it was seen to be so important in relation to the brand that people have spoken to here, and what it is that they expected that they would derive as a value even beyond the profits that they were expected to make. The reputation that they wanted to maintain was of such that they could not ignore the threat that was articulated. And again, that goes to the individual decision of somebody to accept an inducement to breach a procedure. As simple as that. And so critically, we have to understand that there are risks. We have to understand what the second and the third order impacts are beyond just the bottom line to the long-term viability of a company, the long-term viability of the state within the context of fighting corruption as a necessary part of what it is that we all have to do within a synergy across the public and private sector.
All right, thank you so much. I want to get back to Mr. Thwaites, who in his response had indicated about what I take from it, single decisions that are made, whether it be as it relates to a permit and the impact on your business or any other business. And that is something that, you know, we at Customs with our other border regulatory agencies are looking at more, because sometimes I am not sure the extent to which all of us understand how severe and negative that impact can be on your business. And so that is something that I'm happy you raise it so that we can go back and look towards how we can improve collectively in the trading system on that. But going beyond that, as it relates to what Mr. Samuda mentioned about treating everyone as their, thieves. And we have to have in place the bureaucracy, because there's goodness that can come out of bureaucracy. However, we have to have a system that operates in FAIR and not FEAR. Did I spell it correctly? Yes. Yes? Right. So thank you so much for those. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so, continuing the discussion about how we encourage transparency and accountability, I want to pose this question to Mr. Lowe. How do we address the issue of transparent and accountable practices to contribute to the overall integrity and efficiency of public organizations, especially those that have regulatory and enforcement powers?
Well, first of all, we have to see transparency as more than just providing information, right? A website or something like that. It is getting people to know what you do, how you do it, and why you do it, right? And once we understand that, then it comes back a lot to a question that was answered by Kelly, which is collaboration. We have to collaborate with the various stakeholders internally, externally, along the supply chain to ensure that everybody understands what is required, because most of the time, as was said by Mr. Thwaites here, the reason why we have errors sometimes is because of lack of transparency. And then what comes after that? A fine or a penalty, right? Or time and cost, right? And to get rid of that, then it's collaboration, consultation, and partnership, which will address that and understand that transparency is more than just the provision of some information. we also have to ensure that we do business process re-engineering. And we speak about leading by example in terms of ethical leadership. Leading by example also include putting in the framework and the guardrails, as was said. It means that the best of technology, the best of the processes in terms of making them simple, right? And the best of training to ensure, and training not just for internal staff, but your external stakeholders, so that they understand those processes. And that's how you're going to get transparency and get ethical leadership across the board. Hope I have answered the question.
Has he answered the question, Commissioner?
Oh, yes, he has. Okay. I will ensure that your performance appraisal accurately reflects him.
or else I'm going to Wisinko.
So I just want to add, in terms of training and collaboration, which we've spoken about quite a bit. We had a team from Customs, your warehouse branch, quite a substantial team came out, and we did some work with them because they wanted to understand some of the processes and systems that we use in our logistics, equipment, etc. So we did an actual collaboration, and it was really quite welcome, because I think it allowed some of the people in that department to really understand, you know, what we go through every day to build some of these systems and operations. And I think we can do a lot more of that if agencies like yours, because it's one of the things where I think, you know, with the modernization of customs and some of the changes you've made, Commissioner, have really seen better collaboration with the private sector, as Mitri had outlined. And congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Mafu. I think for us, we're trying our utmost best to understand the customs environment, and the customs environment has a number of different players and actors. And so for us, managing a warehouse is important. You know, the infrastructure surrounding it, the safety measures surrounding it, how to maintain it. And so we looked at an entity such as yours. And, you know, thank you so much for facilitating it. But it caused a lot of problem on me, though, because the team now asking for so much because they want to model what you have. And that's a lot of money. And so we have to put in the budgetary resource to ensure that happens. But thank you so much. Go ahead.
Tangential to that, William is giving an example of what you spoke to in your opening remarks, which is the outreach that JCA has been doing. And it is commendable. It is something that I suggest to several of the other agencies. I know that for years, I see my president here, the Chamber of Commerce and Customs have collaborated. And it has been that type of collaboration that allows each to understand the difficulties that the other is encountering. Going back to what Sydney said, because sometimes the fault is on our side. You may think it is the bureaucracy, but have you done the things which are required to allow you to properly engage that bureaucracy and to get the results that you want?
And we continue to engage the process, and so that we can understand more and put in the necessary system, of course, with the budgetary resource. All right, so moving on a little bit, and I'm coming to Miss Chandelaine Davis. At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we pride ourselves with policies and procedures. We're big on that. And my question to you is, how can ethical leaders ensure that transparency and accountability are not just policies on paper, but are deeply embedded in the organizational culture?
Okay. As I said earlier, the purpose, the outcome that we desire by employing ethical leadership is to have an ethical organization. an organization that is sufficiently resilient to withstand all sorts of disruptions. And so, first of all, yes, we prioritize transparency and accountability, and that is evident in documenting same. Mr. Mahfood would have spoken to establishing that code of ethics, and we ourselves have our code of conduct, and the training and retraining to ensure that there's staff buy-in at every level. But to ensure that it comes off the paper, we must employ strategies in change management, especially with respect to organizational culture. It's very important, and I think we have managed to do that at the JCA successfully. And it becomes evident in the response of our team loyalty and buy-in, as is evident in our output with our clients, as would have been recorded here, the reference to increased customer focus, increased transparency, demystifying customs procedures. We would have employed various strategies in simplifying them, as well as automating and adhering and investing in modernity, so that we can keep on. So what we have on paper becomes active and obvious, and something that is interactive and integrated in the trade process. It is hard for the JCA now to walk away. We are fully invested, and that becomes evident, and so it takes it off the paper and makes it a living mechanism for the agency.
Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. And I must say that accountability and transparency, everything within our core values are very important to us. But important to the agency is the governance, the assurance. And I report to a board, and the board chair is here. And I think I must say, thank you, board chair. Thank you, Mrs. Gina Phillips-Black and the members of the board, because you keep me in check. Panelists, I am happy that most of the meetings that we've been having for the board is online, because my board chair would not be seeing me sweating. Because they expect that we should continue to improve. And I can't just report on fluff. I have to make sure I'm giving the practical answers and the evidence. And so I am most appreciative of the oversight that is given. And I always encourage that organization has that within their own apparatus, their own mechanism, because I can say it does work. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commish. So when we talk about transparency and supply chain, one of the things that we have to look at is collaboration, and how can we collaborate to strengthen that when you look at suppliers and importers and regulators. And I want to throw that question out to Kelly, but more broadly to the panel. How can we, and some of the panelists would have touched on some ways in which we are collaborating, but how can we deepen such collaboration within the supply chain? You're talking about suppliers, you're talking about regulators, you're talking about port operators, you're talking about importers. How can we collaborate to improve accountability and efficiency within the supply chain?
All right, thank you, Kingsley. So when we're looking at the supply chain and we're looking at the role of the public sector and the role of the private sector, what we're really talking about in very, very perhaps clumsily broad terms is the facilitation of trade, facilitation of the private sector's goods and services by the public sector. So the public sector is supposed to be there to ensure that the ports are operating properly, that the transportation systems are operating properly, that the utilities are available, etc. And the private sector is the one that is producing what we are facilitating them getting done. So in terms of ensuring that that is done in an ethical manner, the first thing that we need to do is, and I know we don't want overregulation, we don't want excessive oversight, so hear me out, But, the first thing that the government needs to do is to ensure that they have some line of sight on the actual production, so that we're certain that we don't have people who are being, in our labor force, who are being exploited, that we're not abusing animals, that we're not destroying the environment, that we're not treating with the environment in a way that is not sustainable. And so that is the role of the government, to provide that and ensure that there's that kind of minimum establishment and checks and balances around that are in place. But in doing so, a lot of what was spoken about in terms of customer outreach and engagement, we need to, of course, engage with the private sector to understand what are their needs, exactly what position are they at right now, what are they able to accomplish right now, what are the challenges that they're having right now, agree a way forward as to where it is that we want to end up, agree a timeline for ending up there, and engage with them in the process of how are we going to end up there. So if you need to be able to optimize your processes in order to stop destroying the environment, what are the technologies that are going to be needed, and the government can support in that kind of research. But then also, so that's the collaboration that needs to happen sort of directly. But within the public sector, we already have, I think, a fairly robust system, or at least on paper, for our checks and balances. So we have our Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, we have our Financial Administration and Audit Act, we have our Integrity Commission Act, and those are basically telling us within which framework we must work. But I need to emphasize and throw it out to the private sector that there is also a role for you to play. You need to essentially kind of regulate your regulator, and there is legislation in place that facilitates that. So you have the Access to Information Act. We need a strong journalistic core that is investigating what is going on and that is publicizing when there are issues of corruption. We also, have our Protected Disclosures Act. Our employees need to know about that, right? They need to know that if there is corruption going on, they can report that without fear of occupational detriment. Now, as we go along that line and we try to do that, of course, we're going to hit upon the issue of that's just the way it is, Jamaica is corrupt, it don't make no sense to report it because nothing going to happen anyway. And you can understand that perception. And you can understand the perception that if you report the rich uncle for, under Public Protected Disclosures Act, that can say anything it wants to say, I'm going to lose my job. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation as we build the impression of, integrity within our country. It's a chicken and egg situation. And so I think we just kind of have to the extent that we can, each day find the courage to stay the course and just continue to push within the framework that we have as we continue to do the research to find out how we can even improve ourselves further.
Thank you, Kelly. Mr. Samudo?
Just to answer, or partly answer your question. I remember saying some years ago, in fact, Philip may have been at that board meeting, when we were discussing a seminar lineup for the chamber, that if we advertise a seminar on pensions or on crime, we'd be oversubscribed, standing room only. But if you advertised a seminar on trade, you'd be lucky if you got 20 members from the private sector. Okay? And when the chamber engaged the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and did a special, I think maybe 30 people came. Okay? And I remember when my partner Anthony Hilton was Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we were looking at the British market. We did a seminar right here at the Pegasus on it, William. And in my remarks, I gently chastised the government for not including the private sector as part of the team going to do the negotiations. He went up and I thought he was, when I found out what I did eventually, I thought he was very gracious. Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had sent out letters and he got one response. And the one response was, I am willing to go, will the government be paying? The two negotiations that I've been privileged to observe, when you see the teams from the developed nations, the people sitting behind the politicians are business people because governments don't trade. So the private sector needs to get its act together. It needs to become conversant with the treaties, conversant with the rules of engagement, conversant with because a lot of the times you are inhibited by non-tariff barriers. We have products that the world wants and we just can't get into the market. And we're not willing to spend the time to find out how to do so.
Partnership and what is it that drives engagement to enable transparency is really just information. It's quite as simple as that. There's a push and a pull. There's a need for information, and there's a receptiveness for information that we have to understand and to balance around the pivot point about who has what information and who is willing to supply it and what are the impediments to provision of that information. Government doesn't always know what is actually occurring. They don't always know what it is that the impact of laws and policies and regulation actually have within the context of what business experiences and clearly what it is that government needs to accomplish is not always understood on the other side. And so you have to have a way of clearing those obstacles to understanding, and so that there can be beneficial awareness of impact, and then obviously changes that actually need to be made within the context of laws and regulation and policy above all of that, as opposed to the reactions to the business response to that particular environment. And so critically, we have to take the opportunity to understand each other's perspectives. We have to share information in an honest and transparent way, warts and all, so you can understand the impact, and hopefully to do it in an environment without the typical rancor and the kinds of emotions that prevent and inhibit understanding across the public and private sector divide, if I can call it that.
Just to add quickly, on the collaboration, on the topic of collaboration, one thing I haven't heard in this discussion is we recognize that customs is often the enforcement, right? But the order being enforced comes from other agencies in the public sphere, right? So the collaboration to me and some of the conversations I've had and difficulties I've experienced and heard of come from the collaboration between agencies to clarify what is needed for customs to have that ease of trade, whether it's an order coming from MOH, whether it's coming from MEGJEC, the communication between what the order, because if you read these orders, not every order is drafted in the most transparent language possible. So there has to be alignment on what the real requirements are and whose role one thing is. So that collaboration to me, as we talk about the role in helping the corruption, is ease of doing business, transparency, everybody understanding their role. That to me is an area that should be a focus.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thwaites, and we will definitely work on that. Ms. Davis has some input as we move further in coordinated border management, because that's where I'm seeing Mr. Thwaites going as well, also as it relates to the other trade-related matters.
Quite so, Commissioner. I was gratified when Mr. Samuda made his point as someone who is a part of that mechanism that issues invitations to the private sector to impart information and to give guidance with respect to international supply chains, trade facilitation, how to gain market access, and a number of things. But as we're looking at the impact of ethical leadership on the international supply chain, as well as trade facilitation, the role I believe we all should understand that we all have a role in that process. So with respect to, we are speaking about national collaboration, but there's also the sphere for international collaboration, where with respect to supply chain management, that the private sector, as was aptly said, the government does not trade. Has a role in engaging with their suppliers to ensure that the process has integrity and is transparent. And so when your product hits or your shipment hits the border, you are assured that all the rigors of the supply chain would have been adhered to, and therefore you can expect a level, you would have complied sufficiently, and then you would expect a certain level of treatment. Also, within the customs context, and we know that we have employed this strategy, but what we have been doing and we will continue to do is to establish collaborative or partnership agreements with other customs administration intra-regionally. And when I say intra-regionally, I'm speaking of the Americas, not just CARICOM, because we know that you trade with the Americas. And we know that it is important to engage with the governmental entities on that side, whether it is their border security customs, whether it's their police force, to monitor and guarantee a level of surveillance concerning what is happening in that sphere, so as to ensure or to monitor the impact on our trade here in Jamaica. So it is very important, I believe, that even as the government, customs, seeks to engage to monitor the integrity of the supply chain, cross-border interactions, that the private sector also takes the responsibility to engage with their international suppliers to ensure that they are adhering as well, so that we have seamless operations when we get to the port, and very transparent operations when we get to the port.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. I see an opportunity for us at Customs to engage the trade more as it relates to even these trade agreements, because you know they can be somewhat complex sometimes, and so they need to be simplified, and we can be that partner with the trade to have those engagement, as well as other engagement as it relates to market access. You know, the data, we have the big data, and so this is an opportunity for us to further engage, share, and hopefully more private sector members will come on board in their own interest, even in representation at CARICOM, COTED, other areas that requires strong private sector representation. I saw
yes.
Mr. Mahfood.
So just I think to the point you're making, recently we had maybe about a year ago, all of our shipments to the UK were being stripped by Her Majesty's Customs and Excise. And we, you know, the business was growing significantly. We were shipping maybe 5-10 containers every month and doing very well. But it was causing problems because of the delays with the stripping. Had a call with the trade people here at the British High Commission. Went through the whole process, brought them out, showed them what we were doing in terms of our systems of loading the containers and the security measures which we follow. And today, you know, our business is probably 3 times that, 25 to 30 containers a month. And all of those containers go seamlessly into the UK now. So it really is, a big part of it is just having that dialogue and ensuring that you can share the systems that you practice, you know, in terms of practice.
All right, so I'm going to move on to Lieutenant Colonel the CUSTA. What challenges may arise from implementing transparent practices in regions or industries where such practices are not the norm?
I think the inherent challenge is really how do you manage the change to the extent that you can actually get to that point? Do people recognize that there's a need for the change? Are they resistant to it for whatever reason? That the status quo is very attractive to people who are inherently managers as opposed to leaders, and I make a very clear distinction there. Why is it that people hold on to the things that they hold on to within the context of their previous experience as opposed to what it is being articulated to them as a vision of necessary change? And so the change management process, you go through those 8 steps that Carter speaks to. You know, how do you get people to buy into that? How do you show them the short, the medium, and the long-term benefits through the process of change in order to get to the point where they can accept that it is actually required for growth and for sustainable growth within the context of the organization? Any of the business people here on the panel can speak to those businesses that they're aware of that were here in Jamaica and are no longer there anymore. The other day I was having a conversation with some friends of mine about home electrics for the younger persons in the audience. Home electrics was a thing in Jamaica in the 70s and 80s. It's not there anymore. Due deference to anybody that might have had an interest in that business. But, you know, you have to change as a necessary part of sustaining yourself as an organization. You have to change within the context of the persons who make up the organization and the processes, clearly, that are a part of any organizational behavior, and hopefully something that translates to culture. So the significant challenge, I would go back and reiterate, is just, are people willing to understand that there's a need for change? And how do you go about institutionalizing their own, or enlist them in that process of engaging the change process to carry it forward to the point where it becomes now institutionalized and can then cause a company or an entity or even a process to be sustained for the long term?
Yeah, and I like the emphasis on change management. And I think I want to go back to what you said earlier, that we have challenges, right? But sometimes perception is different from reality, and that's an important thing to recognize. And I want to also continue the discussion about challenges as we come closer to the end of this discussion. And I want Mr. Thwaites to jump in answering the question, what are some of the biggest challenges that leaders will face in promoting ethical practices within our complex trade environment? I mean, you represent the JMEA, and so your leaders and your businesses are always having this interaction between regulators and suppliers and customers. How do you see the challenges that you face within that context, and how can we overcome some of those challenges that you might see?
Boy, that's a broad question. I think from the perspective of businesses, I think what we're really looking for is the consistency of treatment of the movement of our goods and the timeliness, consistency, and transparency of what is needed. I think those are the hurdles we face. And as leaders, a big part of our role is to just knock down hurdles. One of the things that really helped us is early on, the commissioner and her staff made a visit to our factory. We were having some issues, and we had a discussion on what the issues were, what their issues were, what our issues were, how our suppliers kind of fit into that role. And you know, the adhesions kind of magically disappeared. It wasn't magic, it was from effort, but it's consistency, understanding, perspective, transparency, roles, responsibilities, training. It's all these things that it's up to us to knock down the hurdles that are within the purview of each of us. Us in the private sector, you in the public sector, and other stakeholders. Yeah, it's not magic, but it should feel like magic sometimes.
Go ahead, Mr. Lowe.
Some of the challenges, I think we speak about collaboration a lot, but one of the things that we must bear in mind is that when we're talking about a chain, as in supply chain, the links are not similar, right? And there are self-interest, right? And that has to be managed. And part of the challenge to change sometimes is just that self-interest, whether it's an organization, individual, somebody think that they might lose a job or something like that. So self-interest is part of the challenge that we have. And even for customs, we do have that challenge. Government has that challenge, private sector. But also culture is part of the change. We speak about this uncle. There is this linkman mentality in Jamaica. Everybody have a link, and they have a link of customs, they have a link of tax, and nobody wants to form a line. Those are part of the challenges, the culture that we have in place, and that along with the bureaucracy itself, part of the challenge. And part of the challenge as well is that a lot of places, the leadership that we're here talking about, you just don't have, right? Because if you don't have that, you can't have change, right? Ethical leadership, the right leadership, visionary leadership, whatever you want to call it, in terms of that particular leadership that you need for people to understand and to lead that change. So those are some of the challenges that we do have.
Authority last week, and we were all lined up very straight in a row, and a gentleman came up and posited the idea that there are two places in Jamaica where people don't chuck any badness. One is Firearm License Authority, and the other one is U.S. Embassy. So it's not that we can't do it, it's that the leadership is not there to insist that we do it. Because when we are forced to, we actually do comply.
It was quite amusing, actually, reading a report in one of the dailies some years ago. A fight broke out at the lines. I think it was in JFK. Flight coming to Jamaica, delays and people getting irascible, and a fight broke out. And I remember the sentence, which went something like, order was magically restored when a woman stood on her suitcase and shouted out, "Mine on a visa."
That's a good icebreaker. But I want to put this question to the panelists. And I'd love to first hear from Mr. Mahfood, if he can, but I certainly would like to hear from everyone. How can leaders effectively balance achieving financial objectives with upholding ethical standards, especially when confronted with opportunities that might tempt them to compromise on ethics for financial gain?
For me, that's actually a simple question, because if you go back to the basics and the fundamentals. Customs has, is it CABIT? Yes. At Wisinko, we say, and we speak about this. I speak about it a lot. We speak about the values that the organization has, which is, God first, family, country, and then company. And then we also speak, our acronym is CHIRP, which is compassion, humility, integrity, respect, and passion. And then we also speak a lot about safety. And safety is not so much a value, but it's a right. So safety in the workplace is a right for every single employee. And every single executive, every single month, we sit at executive meetings and we speak about these values and these rights for our workers. And we live them, we breathe them, and it transforms the whole, and it literally goes right through the organization to ensure compliance at every level. We do continuous orientation, as I spoke about earlier, and we continue to do training ongoing, over and over. And I mean, it's what I think will differentiate every organization, is just practicing those daily routines.
All right, any other panelists want to jump in on that question?
I think for me, it comes back to, I started with the definition of ethical leadership, which is maximizing value, not for yourself, but for the community, for the customer, for society. And if you keep that in mind within a value system, then that's easy to answer, as was said by William, right? Because you're not thinking about yourself. And when you're making a decision, you're thinking about how can you maximize that value for the customer.
I think that one of the things that has come out, especially from Metro William and Sydney, is that this assumption, and I spoke earlier of making assumptions and the prejudice it can lead to, that profit gain in and of itself, ipso facto, must be exploitative. You know? And we have heard from them examples quite to the contrary. So that one of the things is making sure, or put it another way, I remember saying some years ago when we were discussing crime and violence, that, and it was particularly related to tourism. It was a tourism conference. And I say, you know, if you make Jamaica safe for Jamaicans, you don't have to worry about the tourists. So this sort of external focus all the time, what we need to do for export, what we need to do for the foreign direct investment, what we need to do, it's always this. If we do it first and foremost for ourselves and our citizenry, a lot of the other things will fall into place. You're going to have exceptions, obviously. But what William is really saying is that if you attend to your household, if you make everything all right there, that will get the job done, you'll make the profits, you'll have satisfied customers, and you'll have satisfied staff.
Wonderful. Well said, Mr. Samuda. Yes. Deserve a clap, yes? Yes. Mr. Mahfood? Yeah.
Thing that I think there is definitely in Jamaica a need for us to be more long-term thinking. And I say that because I see instances repeatedly, and we have a huge amount of training around things like financial management for our team members. We have workers who will come and say they've been with the company for 15 years, they want to retire so they can get their pension to be able to buy a car or whatever. And we sit down with them and try and go through the need for them not to go through that process. Businesses that are highly ethical at all levels are long-term, sustainable businesses. The same with any organization. Anybody who looks at and says, okay, there is an opportunity for me to cut the corners and do this, I can make a short-term, that is not going to be highly successful and sustainable for the long term. And that's the difference. That's what we need to, as a society, we need to speak more about building that knowledge, that awareness for the need for us to think more long-term in everything that we do. The environment, sustainability, businesses, relationships, the home, the values, etc. It's very, very important because it adds a lot to the whole discussion that we're having today.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Mr. Mahfood. And ladies and gentlemen, we've been having a very intriguing discussion. And so as we seek to wrap the discussion, I just want to ask the panelists, starting from Ms. Davis and coming across, for your final thoughts on the importance of ethical leadership in making the culture change that we so desire in Jamaica. And so in 30 seconds or less, you can just give us the final thought, the thing that you want us to leave the discussion with and the room with today about the topic that we've been discussing?
I will endeavor to do it in 30 seconds. Just to say, I've been listening to Mr. Mahfood, and I've been nodding because what he demonstrates and shared is the human face of leadership and prioritizing the staff, the employee, building employee loyalty. And I think that once that is done, I'm in full agreement with you, sir, that once we have employee loyalty and we are empowering and building the employer will not want to leave, and they will put forth their best. And for us at the JCA, then we will truly see country above self.
I'll maybe go at a broad level to say that ethical leadership is what you need for that individual wealth, and at the national level for that prosperity in order to reduce the crime and violence, and for all of us to be better off. It starts with the individual, organization, and the country.
I'd wrap it by saying, let's make the ethical decision easy by making ease of use, easy to do the right thing, transparent, and keep our focus on building the long-term viability of our economy, our country, our businesses, and our employees.
Thank you.
I think we've said a lot today, but the most important is take the basic fundamental values, starting with your faith, and focus on the important things, and then lead by example. That's the most important of all.
Thank you.
In my own business, in any of the businesses that I'm involved with or chair, government or private, I use 3 philosophies to guide procurement and how we do business. 1, is it good for the company? 2, is it good for our country? And 3, can it stand the test of scrutiny? If it meets those 3 requirements, then we can move forward. If it doesn't, it ends right there.
Thanks.
Awesome.
I want to paraphrase a famous saying that the only way for the world to be destroyed is not by men who do evil, but for the people who sit by and watch it being done. Said differently, the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is that good men do nothing. We have to do something. We have to become engaged as persons with an individual and a collective context. We have to support each other as organizations across the public and private sector divide. We have to act in accordance with what our core principles and values are as we understand them, as we articulate them, as we want others to believe. And so we have to do what it is that is right as ethical leaders across that public-private sector divide. We have to do something.
Okay, I don't really think that there's any better example than what William has said in terms of it's going to come back to you tenfold, right? And let's look at just the slogan for customs, country above self. Understand that it's not just what you're doing for your own organization, but what is in the betterment of the entire country. Because the truth is that we can't hurt one segment of our population and not expect that to come back to us. We can't disenfranchise one section of our population and not expect that to come back to us. So in everything that we're doing, understand, even if you want to say you're doing it selflessly or if you're doing it selfishly, there is a benefit to just making decisions that help and benefit other persons. And there was a piece of advice that I got, I think perhaps 2 years out of school, and it stuck with me my entire life. And I want to say to everybody who's entering the workforce, no. The first day that you slip, the first day that you do something that you're not supposed to do at the behest of someone who is corrupt, they have you for life. Right? You're never going to get from under their thumb. That is it for you. So make the right decision every single day. The money is not worth it. The house is not worth it. If you keep pushing, it will come. And it may not come to the extent that you might dream of, but you don't want to be under somebody's thumb for the rest of your life. So make the right decision every single day from day one of your career.
Yes. we've been talking about ethical leadership at the level of government, the private sector, organizations, agencies, and so on. If ethical leadership doesn't start in the home, we have a problem. You start where you set the example so that what you are doing is indwelling in the next generation what we have failed to do in this. If you grow up with ethics being taught in the home, reinforced in school, reinforced in church, you'll be surprised at the change that you'd see.
Awesome nuggets. And I will just add by saying values and attitudes. Right, Sean? Values and attitudes. Live your core values, as I will say to the team. Live your core values and foster a culture of care. We say here at the Jamaica Customs Agency, customs cares. Not just for our team members, the customs family, but for the customers and our stakeholders that we serve as well. I think that today we have heard so much information and nuggets for us to move forward and to continue to build our own program. Let me hand over to the moderator extraordinaire, Mr. Kingsley Henry.
So ladies and thank you, Commissioner. So ladies and gentlemen, we heard a lot about partnership, and I am encouraged by a lot that I've heard from the private sector and from our government partners about the way forward. And if you think that this morning into afternoon has been edifying, let me see you put your hands together for our distinguished panel.
And so I am again I will call their names again. So let's hear it from Ms. Chandelaine Davis, Mr. Marlon Lowe, Mr. Sidney Twaits, Mr. William Mafood, Mr. Mitri Siaga, Lieutenant Colonel Richard DaCosta, Kelly Greenaway, and Mr. Milton Mafood. Milton Samuda.
Thank you to our panel. And the discussion is now officially ended, and we're dismissing the panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. And thank you to our participants. You have been a wonderful guest and audience, and I thank you for being here. And at this time, is lunch served, sir?
Almost there, Commissioner.
Okay.
Almost there. Just one other formality to get through. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, before we get to lunch, I would like to invite Mr. Earl Stewart Jr., Senior Director, Executive Services, Acting Senior Director, to do the vote of thanks. I see he has a walk all the way from the back. Put your hands together for Mr. Stewart.
I will move expeditiously. I'm not standing between lunch. All right. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw this enlightening and impactful fourth staging of the JCA's annual anti-corruption panel discussion under the theme Ethical Leadership, the Impact on Cross-Border Trade, Supply Chain, and Trade Facilitation to a close, it is my honor and privilege to deliver and express appreciation because gratitude is a must. On behalf of the organizing committee and everyone present here today, I'd like to express our deepest gratitude to all those who have contributed to the success of this panel discussion. And yes, I said success. Firstly, I extend our heartfelt thanks to our esteemed chief guest, Mr. Milton Samuda. Who graciously accepted our invitation despite, sir, the many other activities that required your attention. Your insights on the importance of ethical leadership have not only enriched our understanding, but have also inspired us to take stronger, more decisive actions in our fight against corruption personally and professionally. Sir, you related the scores for Jamaica, land we love, 44 of 100 and 69 of 180. That's D and D minus respectively. Nonetheless, you charge that as ethical leaders, we should lead by example. Be brave. You encourage that as ethical leaders, self and our functionaries should be trained and resourced. Sir, you finally motivate that as ethical leaders, we must advocate, and most importantly, as ethical leaders, we must not quit. Our sincere thanks also go to the distinguished panelists. Lieutenant Colonel Richard DaCosta, Mr. Siaga, Mr. Thwaites, Mr. Mahfood, Ms. Kelly, Greenaway, Ms. Chandeline Davis, Mr. Marlon Lowe, and our moderators, CEO Commissioner, Mrs. Velma Ricketts-Walker, who I saw in a different role today, and the astute Mr. Kingsley Henry. This was certainly PPP, Public-Private Partnership Panel Discussion. Panelists, you have shared your expertise, experiences, and practical perspective on the thematic questions presented that provided us with added value knowledge. Key takeaways we won't readily find in any book or manuscript. Your discussions have shed light on the multifaceted nature of corruption and the various ways we can combat it through ethical leadership and implementation of strategic initiatives and mechanisms. You have provided us with practical insight strategies that undoubtedly, in our collective mission to create a more just, corrupt-free business, supply chain, and society. We're also deeply grateful to the one, and yes, I said the one, that have demonstrably led from the front and top, whose generous support made the panel discussion possible, CEO, Commissioner of Customs, Mrs. Velma Ricketts-Walker. Your commitment to the cause of anti-corruption is truly commendable, and we look forward to your continued ethical leadership, collaborative disposition in the ongoing metamorphosis of the JCA, further raising the ethical bar. A big thank you to the organizing and supporting teams. And may I ask the Internal Affairs Division, led by Ms. Tamika Goulburn, to stand, wherever you are in the room. Put your hands together for the organizing team. Thank you. And they were supported by the Public Relations and Customer Service Branch, the Information Service Division, the Finance and Administration Division, because, everything takes money, right? Nothing gets done without money. Who worked tirelessly behind the scene to ensure that everything was efficiently and effectively coordinated and executed smoothly. Your dedication and hard work have been instrumental in making this event a success. I would also like to thank all participants and attendees here today who have joined us in presence, or I know I saw Tamika with something up, so I'm taking it. In Customs, we have people in the virtual, right? Your presence and active participation have added immense value to the panel discussion. We hope that you will carry forward the knowledge and inspiration gained here and become champions of anti-corruption in your respective fields. Lastly, I want to acknowledge the efforts of our lead moderator, Mr. Kingsley Henry, in such capacity. Sir, you have piloted this successful journey today. The media, Jamaica Information Services, aiding us to get the message of ethical leadership importance across the globe. To everyone in one way or another who have contributed to this panel discussion, whether in attendance, through planning, through support, we say a big thank you, and it has not gone unnoticed. To our host, the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, we express gratitude for availing your services to us. Let us all leave today with renewed sense of purpose and commitment to fight corruption in all its forms. Edmund Burke said, and I quote, and I heard somebody alluded to it earlier, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Today, we have signaled that good men will do something. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you. Have a great remaining day.
And thank you, Mr. Stewart, for doing an excellent job with the vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, lunch will be served, so we hope you will stay with us. And I realize, I look around the room and I see a lot of familiar faces. And I deliberately am not calling any name, because once you start identifying people like Corahan, Sylvester, you start getting in trouble.